What's happening, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review the new film Kingsman, The Golden Circle from director Matthew Vaughn. I realize this movie is not coming out for a week, so I will be very broad and general until the point where I will give a hell of a lot of warnings about when spoilers will begin, because this movie is absolutely fantastic and I don't want to spoil the experience for anyone. As you can see, I'm proudly wearing my Kingsman Golden Circle gear that I picked up at San Diego Comic-Con about 2 months ago. They even gave me one of these little Kingsman doohickeys that I guess you're supposed to spin one-handed, but they're like stress relievers, or I don't know what they are. Anyway, they're fun little gadgets. In any case, let's get to the broad general overview. Like I said, I will not be giving away any spoilers for the time being. It was great to have the actor Pedro Pascal there to introduce the movie. A lot of people recognize him from Game of Thrones and Narcos, but he is fucking incredible in this movie, so if you're a fan, you'll definitely be happy. But Kingsman: The Golden Circle is an excellent sequel to the first movie, Kingsman: The Secret Service. I think Matthew Vaughn is basically reinventing the super spy slash superhero genre in an R-rated context, which I'm totally on board with. I would say there are a lot of things this movie does better than the first. It's got more heart, it's got more epic action, but there are some other areas that I'll get into in my spoiler section where it perhaps is not as strong. I would say, in spite of one really outrageous scene, it probably has less of an edge than the first movie had. But suffice to say, if you like the first one, and I fucking love the first one, I've seen the first one I think 5 or 6 times, you're going to be very happy with this sequel. And what's cool is that you get the sense that Matthew Vaughn is building this giant sprawling narrative where the status quo is always changing. And that's very brave to do. It's one of the things that a lot of franchises fail to do because they're so worried about putting a dent in the Batmobile, so to speak. They're terrified to do anything like kill any characters off or make any major changes that might scare away the fans. Matthew Vaughn very much enjoys playing without that safety net and is definitely trying to break new ground. You can tell on one hand that he absolutely loves the old school James Bond movies from the 60s. I mean, that scene in the first Kingsman movie where Samuel L. Jackson and Colin Firth talk about what made those movies so great tells you all you need to know about Matthew Vaughn and his love of the original James Bond movies. But James Bond movies today, they're going for a much more mainstream product than Matthew Vaughn is with Kingsman. There are not going to be any jokes about anal sex in a James Bond movie, but you can have them in a Kingsman movie. Whether or not Matthew Vaughn chooses to exercise that option is totally up to him, but it's just cool to know that he can do whatever he wants because this is a brand new franchise that's able to take risks that the James Bond franchise cannot. Matthew Vaughn's love of 80s music is in full effect in this movie, and more often than not is coupled with insanely good action sequences. The action scenes in this movie are going to make your jaw hit the damn floor. They're easily the strongest part of the movie because they do this incredible choreography that also uses the camera at impossible angles. And even if the camera is at a wildly distorted angle, you're never confused about what is happening. There's no like rapid fire editing, no shaky cam bullshit. It's very fluid, it's very beautiful, very violent. I would argue that there's an action scene at the opening of the movie and at the closing of the movie that's basically going to make majority of people who see this movie absolutely fall in love with it. But as I said before, this movie also has a lot more heart. There were scenes with just characters interacting where the crowd was roaring in approval. Granted, this was a crowd that was very much in the bag for Kingsman, so these people were fired up. But it was interesting to see thunderous applause during scenes that were not driven by action. But when it comes to mainstream escapist entertainment, I might regret saying this tomorrow, but I think this might be my favorite popcorn movie, a roller coaster movie of the year. I mean, there's some strong contenders out there, but when it comes to this kind of entertainment, I think so far, I mean, granted, we still got Thor and Star Wars on the horizon, but right now I'm going to plant my flag on this as my particular favorite, even if I do have some major reservations about the shift in tone. As I said before, this movie has a lot less of an edge than not a lot less. This movie has less of an edge than the first one, and it's a lot more about certain characters growing up, which perhaps makes it just a tad more family friendly. However, I think that switch in tone might allow this movie to pop and explode in a way that the first movie did not. It wouldn't surprise me at all if this movie becomes a giant runaway success this fall. This is a movie where the entire family can go and have a great time. There might be 1 or 2 scenes where a parent might choose to cover their child's eyes, but on the whole, everyone's going to walk out of this movie smiling, laughing, high-fiving, arms around each other in a really terrific mood. So let's get into some specifics and some spoilers about what I loved, what I did not. So if you have not seen the movie, last warning, abort, 3, 2, 1, blah, blah, blah. I just can't review a movie in its entirety, or I don't feel like I've really have had my say until I get into something specific. First and foremost, I just want to say that Mark Millar is rapidly becoming the Stan Lee of his generation. For people who don't know, Mark Millar is an outstanding comic book writer from Scotland who used to make a ton of money working for Marvel, doing great work. Then at a certain point decided he was going to break off on his own and do a bunch of creator-owned material, and that's led to movies like Kick-Ass, as well as this franchise, Kingsman, originally just called The Secret Service, was a graphic novel by Mark Millar and Dave Gibbons, and it was terrific. And the first Kingsman movie took a lot of liberties, but you can tell Matthew Vaughn is very much trying to make this his own world, using Mark Millar's text as a springboard. So let's start with the things that I love about this movie. From the word go, I knew I was in good hands because it begins with bagpipes, and of course I'm thinking, oh, well, a lot of these characters from England and Scotland, and bagpipes are totally appropriate. But then when I hear the music, it's like, wait a second, I recognize that music. That's Take Me Home Country Roads by John Denver, which, in a strange coincidence, this is the second movie starring Channing Tatum that has used this song to dramatic effect this year. The other one is Steven Soderbergh's film Logan Lucky. It's used for a very different purpose in this because it pops up again and again throughout the movie. It is interesting to see John Denver making such a huge comeback when it comes to movie soundtracks. But what was cool about that hybrid of Scottish and American culture is that this movie is very much about two wildly different cultures coming together, working together to save the world. You've got the Kingsman from the UK, and you got the Statesman from the US, and it is absolutely a blast seeing this culture clash at work because so much of this movie is just about little things like, do you prefer really, really nice old bourbon? Or do you prefer a really nice old single malt? Or do you spell whiskey W-H-I-S-K-E-Y or W-H-I-S-K-Y as they do over in the UK? And it's just really, really fun seeing these characters who are totally badass all in their own way, playing little subtle games of one-upsmanship as they try to save the world from Julianne Moore. So the story picks up about a year after the events of the first movie. Eggsy has saved the world a few times. As we see in his office, he's got a couple of those newspaper headlines that the Kingsmen like to use when they're basically about something that's totally unrelated, but it's just there to mark the occasion. Eggsy is starting to make a name for himself, and he's comfortably settled into his role as Galahad. But what's interesting is that guy who was just a prick in the first movie, who was unto the manner born and ended up not making the grade at the Kingsmen, he's actually back now, and he's been recruited by a rival organization, and he's got that great metal arm that we've seen in all the trailers. And as it turns out, he's working for Julianne Moore, and Julianne Moore basically is like a megalomaniac who wants to dominate the entire drug trade around the world, every kind of drug imaginable. And she comes up with this scheme whereby she's going to force all the leaders of the world into legalizing it and regulating it and taxing it, and heaven help anyone who stands in her way, because she likes to do things like turning people into hamburger meat and things like that and making people eat it. I wouldn't say she's nearly as cool as Samuel L. Jackson's character in the first. I really like the two-man team of Sophia Boutella and Samuel L. Jackson in the first one. They might be some of my favorite villains I've seen in any movie in the 21st century. And sadly, the villains in this don't quite measure up. And it's kind of like when I look at a James Bond movie, what makes a great Bond movie? You have to have a great villain. You have to have a great theme song. You have to have a great actor in the shoes as Bond. Like, there are a couple of different ingredients that go into the soup that make a great James Bond movie. So I'd say what holds Kingsman: The Golden Circle back a tad is that Julianne Moore's villain is just not quite as good as Samuel L. Jackson's was. And the reason for that is probably because they spend so much time developing the characters at Statesman. Channing Tatum is fucking awesome. Pedro Pascal is incredible. He might actually steal the show. I mean, as good as Colin Firth is and as good as Mark Strong is, Pedro Pascal is fucking incredible, like fighting with bullwhips and lassos and using this crazy southern accent. I mean, he is just hilarious, but also in action just hell on wheels. Or the way he flips his six-shooters around and like works it into like a ballet. It is truly stunning to watch him in action. So as I mentioned in my opening, this movie has a little bit less of an edge than the first one, probably because it's a little bit bigger and more cartoony. It's a little bit more over the top than the first one, probably because they just had more money to work with. I mean, there's still plenty of randy, naughty humor. At one point, they're trying to figure out a way to put a tracer on this girl that they want to follow, and they have to put the tracer inside her mucous membrane. And there are a couple of different parts of your body where you have a mucous membrane, and so we basically follow Eggsy's fingers down her belly with the camera gliding along her belly and skin as it goes down into her panties and places up her little hoo-ha. And that got a huge roar of laughter from the crowd. So obviously we're not in PG territory at all. But the reason I say it has a little bit less of an edge is because this movie is very much about Eggsy growing up. He's involved in a relationship. He's meeting the girl's parents. He's becoming a citizen of the world in a lot of ways. Perhaps Taron Egerton is just a little bit more interesting when he's allowed to be a little bit more irresponsible. But getting back to The Statesman, Halle Berry's an excellent addition to the cast. Jeff Bridges, excellent addition to the cast. I mean, so much of this movie is basically just a giant commercial for becoming a raging alcoholic, because drinking whiskey is such an integral part of the plot, so much a part of various rituals, whether you're toasting to fallen friends, and people do die. I don't know if I want to say who dies or not, but characters do die left and right in this, which forces a seismic change for both the Statesman and the Kingsman, and they create this incredible harmonious marriage at the end. And there's just something about seeing Channing Tatum graduating from, cowboy hats and blue jeans and cowboy boots to wearing a Kingsman style full regalia going to work at the end of the movie that just makes you feel unbridled glee and joy. And I think that's the best way to describe this movie. You will feel glee and joy throughout. I think it's safe to say that I prefer the first movie, but I will definitely be seeing this again. And if they make any more of these, and by the way this movie ends, it seems like they definitely are setting themselves up for that. And so I get the sense that these are just the first two chapters in what could conceivably be a very, very long franchise that could become a major rival to James Bond, because if they're able to make R-rated movies that are able to compete with Bond might start to seem a little old-fashioned. It might seem like your grandfather's Secret Service as opposed to something that's very modern and cutting edge. So overall, I'm a very, very happy fan. I have my quibbles, I have my grievances. This is one of the movies I was looking forward to most this year, so perhaps I was setting myself up for a little bit of a disappointment on some level. But any movie that makes me feel chills, any movie that makes me feel exhilarated, any movie that makes me walk out with a smile on my face, any movie that makes me want to see more in that franchise is absolutely doing its job. I'm thrilled to no end with what Matthew Vaughn has been able to accomplish with this franchise. One thing I'm always talking about with teenagers, I have a lot of little brothers, is what their favorite franchises are from the 21st century that have come out during their lifetime. Something that's unique to the 21st century and not a remake or a reboot or a rehashing of something old. And you could say, hold your horses there. Kingsman is a nod to James Bond, and that might be true, but originally it was a graphic novel, Secret Service, that came out in the 21st century, and these are movies based on that graphic novel. So I think this franchise belongs to the 21st century. It doesn't feel like James Bond's 50-year-old struggle with Spectre. I mean, James Bond, as much as I love him, is definitely a creature of the Cold War. And as much as I love franchises like Marvel obviously has been around for many, many decades, it's time to start making a case for Kingsman as one of the most interesting, new, original, ongoing franchises in this century. I hope this review has helped you make up your mind about whether or not you want to see it, or if you're already totally on board seeing it, I hope this has only helped you double down on your enthusiasm. Just rest assured, if you love the first Kingsman, you're going to fucking love Kingsman: The Golden Circle. And then we can sit down and drink a shitload of whiskey and debate which movie we think is stronger. In any case, thank you so much for watching this review. I hope you'll consider giving my channel a subscribe. Hope everyone has an awesome weekend. If you want to talk more, give me a shout on Twitter at Colbrax, or leave a comment in the comments below. Or you can also find me on my podcast, Wrong Reel, which is available on iTunes. And I'll be back at you guys tomorrow to review Darren Aronofsky's new movie, Mother. So long.